What's up, girls? I just read Trust by Hernan Diaz, 2021 novel, 2023 winner of the Pulitzer Prize for Fiction, and it was written during Hernan's Coleman Fellowship year at the New York Public Library, which is a really cool fellowship that creative writers can apply for and receive. They work at the New York Public Library for 9 months. They get $90,000, and in order to apply, you need like a very research-heavy fiction project, which I've known about the fellowship for a while, but I hadn't read any of the projects that have come out of that program. And after reading this book, it's very clear that he, did a ton of research. And he also has an interview on Service 95, which is Dua Lipa's like book club that she does, which is really amazing, by the way, if you've never seen it. There's actually another like book YouTube person who mostly I think does like literary commentary. His name's Below the Fray, and he has a video where he talks about Service 95 and Dua Lipa, and he kind of makes the claim that she's actually the best author interviewer out there today, like better than radio shows or talk shows or Oprah or late night. So that was really cool, and it was very persuasive. And I've now watched her interview for with David Zalai for Flesh, and also with Hernan for Trust, and I totally agree that she's like an amazing author interviewer. So that's pretty cool. The thing I liked so much about Trust is it did a lot of things well that I think contemporary novels should aim to do well. Number one, it's kind of experimenting with form. I feel like, well, first of all, the book is told in 4 different parts, and it's a pretty trippy experience reading the book. It makes you kind of want to go back and reread the book immediately, right away, which happens to me occasionally with books, but this book especially because of the way it's written, I like am kind of inclined to just pick it back up again. But the first section is like a novelistic account of this New York financier and his wife. The second section is the actual financier's plan for a memoir in response to the fiction novel that's been written about him. The third section is from a perspective of this Italian immigrant woman, I guess son of or daughter of an immigrant, because her father immigrated to America and she was born in America. But she then goes to work for the financier and help him write his memoir in response to the fiction novel that was written about him. And then the last section is from the perspective of that financier's wife. And each new section changes the meaning of the previous section in a pretty profound way that really makes you reflect on the subjective nature of truth. What is truth? Can you really get to like an absolute truth? And I think the takeaway from the book is like, you should strive to find the truest possible, account of what's happened. But at the same time, I think that requires a ton of energy and different perspectives, which is cool and a great message. The character Andrew Bevel, who is the financier, is quite, I would say, emblematic of the faults within the capitalist system. He kind of like he's convinced that he's a very noble character and that he's always kind of doing everything for the good of the country, and that his self-interests are always aligned with the interests of the country, and it becomes pretty clear that he's kind of tricked himself into believing that psychologically, what by greed or whatever, uh, and his relationship with the public becomes kind of more and more insidious as the book progresses. And Hernan says himself in the Service 95 interview that he did with Dua Lipa is that he wanted the Andrew Bevel character to kind of resemble Victor Frankenstein's monster of, you know, the American great men. So he says he takes parts of J.P. Morgan and Carnegie and whatever, and takes kind of their worst insidious traits and tries to pull them into one, character. Um, and I think it's very fitting that this kind of villainous, emblem of the kind of darker side of capitalism uh, would be, he only works in stocks, which Renan also goes on to say, like, it makes sense, like, that he's so abstract and removed that he's, like, basically, looking at stock tickers, and is not ever actually in person with the commodities or businesses or goods that they even represent. He's just, like, up in a room somewhere. So that was pretty cool. He's definitely a great villain. I loved the character Ida. She's an Italian immigrant. The book's taking place in the 1920s, so she's alive at a time where Italian immigrants were having a pretty tough go of it. As I was reading her section, I kind of kept thinking back to, like, The Godfather 2, the Robert De Niro, like, flashback part of The Godfather 2, where he immigrates to America, after his family is assassinated, and how tough it is in New York for the Italian immigrants, and how if you really wanted to succeed in that kind of broken system, you kind of had to join the mafia or the mob. In her instance, she doesn't, but I was just kind of making those comparisons in my mind because I just recently watched The Godfather 2. There's also a part of the book where she is applying for the job to work for Bevel, and there are so many women lined up, basically applying for the same job to be like a typist. And it reminded me of the scene in Schindler's List where Schindler it's kind of doing the same thing, where he's basically auditioning like a bunch of women to be his secretary, and he's kind of just going off looks or whatever. In this instance, Bevel seems to be going more off of, like, spunk or whatever, but yeah, I thought those were some interesting parallels. Also, I was thinking a lot about manners in this book. One thing about Andrew Bevel is that he uses manners and etiquette as kind of this defense in order to, conceal what's actually going on with him. This is also revealed in the Ida section, but, like, he's saying that it would be whatever, bad etiquette to ever talk about his 300-foot yacht, and I realized, like, the purpose in concealing the fact that he has a 300-foot yacht is in that it kind of gives him some sort of power in exchange, like, he's able to kind of fly under the radar and experience all of these like insane luxuries and then kind of still convince himself and try to convince the public that he's, you know, pulling for the greater good of the American everyman, um, for all American citizens. Um, it's interesting. He uh, comes from a line of successful American businessmen and entrepreneurs, and so inherited his huge fortune, and then he really makes all of his money on shorting the stock market during the Great Depression, which would be like, as someone working in finance, probably morally the worst way you could make a ton of money in the financial markets. So his psychology is kind of this recursive thing where he's like, people don't understand. I was, in doing what was best for myself, I was doing what was best for the country. And then after making that money, I could help whatever, help people out. Um, it's interesting. He's like a very, very good, like, moral tool in the author's, I guess, like, case against capitalism. Um, there's a lot of gender stuff in this book. Um, at one point, they kind of go through like women's involvement in just owning individual stocks in American history, and that's pretty interesting. That in the period just before the Great Depression, during all of that economic prosperity, that there was an influx of women stockholders, and that before that point in time, there was really no female involvement in finance at all in America, which is pretty interesting and you know fascinating. And another thing the book did well is really, I don't read a lot of biographies, honestly. I'd like to read more biographies, but it made me feel that, uh, even the best biographies are probably further from the truth than we'd like to admit, especially about great men, and especially about great men uh, from a long time ago. You know, um, I had this teacher, um, I think Mr. Lewis was his name, who taught me in economics and U.S. history in high school, and he always said this thing that was like, victors write the history books, um, meaning that whoever kind of comes out on top is going to have this power and is going to be able to create this like subjective bias in their favor. And this novel is like very reflective of that. Uh, I love the Ida character. She almost feels like a kind of Goldfinch like character in the way that um, she's incredibly observant and smart, and maybe it's just also that she's in New York. Her section was by far my favorite. Uh, and the Mildred character, who's part four, um, he also, it's interesting because, like, she gets all of this credit that's kind of been stolen from her. And in the same breath that he gives her all of this credit that's kind of been stolen and covered up by her husband for her, intelligence and involvement in all of his, financial schemes. At the same time, she's kind of morally corrupt as well, because like Andrew Bevel is always defending his decisions as being, the best possible decisions for the American economy, and it turns out he's not even the one, really. She says something about there's always, you know, she's the ventriloquist and he's the dummy. Um, but yeah, just totally fascinating book. And can't recommend it enough. Check it out. Trust Hernan Diaz.